안녕하세요. Now, unfortunately, I will speak in English, and I wish to tell you a little bit about how we're going to get there and how you need to think in order to live in this world of accelerating change which heads towards what people call a singularity. That's what I'm going to do in the first half of this address. In the second half, I'm going to delve into the particular project of my fascination, which is changing the world as we speak, computers and cars getting together and making that change, computers driving cars. But first, let's go back in history and look at an example of people who did not know how to think in this exponential way. It's how we see things move from scarce to abundant and how we must think exponentially rather than linearly. This was the very first digital camera developed at the Kodak company. You can see it's very large and clunky, and this was developed in 1996. In that day, Kodak had a market cap of 28 billion US dollars and 140,000 people working for them. Let's step forward in time because this is when their board was shown that digital camera, and they said, I don't know if we should sell this because we are Kodak, we make film, we make chemicals and paper. This is our business. Our business is not electronics, and so they decided not to sell it. So in 2012, it was a different story for Kodak. Their market cap was less than 100 million US dollars. They were bankrupt. They had 17,000 employees, and that very same year, 2012, this company, you all know Instagram, sold for $1 billion, and they had 13 employees. Well, Kodak felt we are in the business of papers and chemicals, and this terrible, clunky, low-resolution, giant camera, nobody will ever want that. But Instagram said, no, we're in the business of helping people share their memories. Well, Kodak was in that business too, but they didn't know it. Some people in Kodak knew it, but their board didn't know it. And so these guys generated $1 billion in value with just 13 people instead of 140,000 people because they thought the new way. They realized the real business that Kodak was in and beat them at it. And now Kodak is a lesson of history. This is what happens when computers take things that used to be scarce and make them abundant. Photography used to be scarce. Used to be film was expensive. Used to be you went on a trip and you came back with 3 rolls of film. Today you have this memory card. I'm sorry, that's not a Samsung card, but you have a memory card and I took 700 gigabytes of photos on a trip I took this summer. I don't even know how many it was. We think of it as costing nothing. We think of it as abundant, and the economics of the world change when people think this way. So there are many technologies now that have become exponential. We start with the computer technologies, computers and sensors and networks and virtual reality and artificial or augmented reality. The physical technologies based on computers like robotics and digital manufacturing, these are things that are becoming exponential as photography did. And even non-electronic things like bioscience and genetics and medicine, these are also now on exponential curves. To live in the future, everyone will have to understand how to throw away their linear intuitions and gain exponential intuitions. This chart, which you'll see a few times today, is a chart of the amount of computing you can get for $1. Now, the last part of this chart, and I think I have a laser here maybe. Do I have a laser? No, I don't. But the last part of this chart is what we call Moore's Law. I hope you have heard of Moore's Law. And Moore's Law is the most famous exponential law, and it pertains to the circuit chip, the integrated circuit chip, which is powering all of our electronics today. And it was coined, Moore's Law, about 51 years ago. Now, this chart you see is a chart on what's called logarithmic graph paper, which means that even though it looks like a line, it's really an exponential, going up very, very fast. Each unit is 10 times more than the unit below it. But Ray Kurzweil and Catherine Myronic, who you'll hear from later, put this chart together going back before the integrated circuit, going to the discrete transistor, which is how they made computers long ago, going to the vacuum tube, the relay, and the very earliest computing machines on the punch card. And they found that even though Moore's law was 50 years old, that this principle had been going on for over 100 years. Here we see a line, which is really an exponential, going back all the way to 1900. And on that chart, do you see the Second World War, the Great Depression, the Korean War, any of the big events of history? You don't see them. This advance has happened inexorably. It seems almost to be a rule of nature. It isn't, and yet it has continued in this way regardless of human events. And this is where the world is going. When you take something and make it digital, many things happen to it. First of all, it becomes stealthy, hidden. People don't understand it. That digital camera that Kodak made, the people who were in the business of selling all those film cameras, they didn't understand the fact that this was going to change their world. It was surprising to them. And this is what we call disruption. Disruption, a word that is used a lot now in Silicon Valley, really has at its core the idea that you don't understand this new thing coming up and your old way of thinking does not adapt. So it's very important. Disruption is not just changing the world, it's not just changing an industry. It's changing it with something that the people who are the experts do not predict and do not understand, and this is what happened here. So what you do with the digital technology is you make things virtual. You make things that used to be physical, and you put them inside software and inside a computer. When you do that, they become effectively free or very cheap, like the camera that I told you about. The pictures are effectively free to us. The cost is so low, we don't even consider it. When you make something free or cheap, it spreads out to everyone, democratized. It is available to everyone. The economics are completely rewritten. Look at this picture, taken today, but from the hair, it's supposed to be set in the 1980s. And look at all the things in the picture. You have all of these in your pocket today, except the hair. The hair, fortunately, we have left behind. Everything here. Actually, this picture doesn't even capture it. Really, in this picture should be all of his record collection, all of his video collection, walls full of media and books should be in this picture. They're not. This is how much the world has changed. You may not have seen it this way before, and yet there it is. Let me help you understand the difference in your intuitions. If I was to tell you that I was going to take 30 steps, in a linear way, 1 meter per step, dump, 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 30 steps, you would very easily intuit that I'm going to get to the other side of the room by taking those 30 steps. This is a natural and easy thing for everyone to understand. But what if I told you I was going to take 30 exponential steps, like Moore's law? Doubling, 1 meter, 2 meter, 4 meters, 8 meters. How far am I in 30 steps? Well, I go to the moon, and I come back in 30 steps, or 26 times around the world. Across the room and to the moon and back. This is the difference, and yet that moon and back has been real for computers and everything that they drive. You must learn to think differently if you are going to survive in this world. Look at these companies and what they've done. Nobody has a big long-distance bill anymore because of Skype. Shops are closing everywhere you go because of Amazon, eBay, Alibaba. Newspapers are shutting down everywhere because of Craigslist giving free classified advertising. Record stores have disappeared because of stores like iTunes and other online music services. Industries are falling. The first industries to be digital and not understand the intuition I just told you have fallen down. And your industry might if you're not careful. Here are some quotes from not idiots, but the leaders of their industries in the time. Western Union was the big telegraph company in the United States, and there's their president saying, the telephone is that's not going to change anything. Nobody's going to want to use that. Many of you, if you're computer people, might know the Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC. It was the main provider, the biggest provider of mini-computer technology in the 70s. Here is the CEO, the man who founded that company and changed computing, not understanding that computing would change again very short time after he says this. These were not fools. These were the experts, and they failed this intuition. Here I put to you actually not a very good representation of an exponential curve on regular graph, but I've also put a line on there, a linear graph, to show you the difference and why people make the mistake. When something begins, it is small. And even if it's growing exponentially, like those punch cards and transistors were, it might be going from 0.01 to 0.02 to 0.04, 0.08, doubling, but you don't notice it. It's very small compared to your intuitions, which is that things should keep growing on a line. Things should be a nice line. And then suddenly, the slope gets higher, and it crosses over, and you think, oh my God, where did this come from? The internet in 1994 suddenly appeared to the world, and everyone said the internet is changing the world, but it had been going since 1969. But the inflection point was this crossing over when suddenly the intuition shifted and the world changed underneath it. But let me tell you why it's so hard to understand, because in reality, when you're at that inflection point, when things are about to change, it's a different story. You don't see the part that's coming. That's hidden from you because you're in the present. And so this chart on its own doesn't show you that the world is about to be turned upside down, and yet so many times it has. Look at these companies. Hilton Hotels, many fine hotels around the world, and a very nice market cap, a very nice business. But Airbnb, much larger now in terms of rooms that it books and in terms of market cap that it has, and yet it doesn't own a single hotel room. All it owns is an app. It is just a piece of software, and yet it has displaced this big company which owns all those big buildings and manages all those big buildings. These are hotels. You might have said photography, sure, music, sure, but hotels, and as I'm going to show you, cars. This man is Marc Andreessen. He wrote the original Mosaic browser, and he's a venture capitalist today. And he reminded people a few years ago of something we in the computer industry have known, but the world needs to learn. Software is eating the world. Everything is being taken over by software. Everything must be software. If you are not a software company, I will tell you this, if you do not find that the value of your company, the thing that makes your company better than the competitor, is in your software, I don't think you'll be a company well into the 21st century. You still will make things. We will have companies that make things. But the thing that makes them different is going to be the software, and this is where the focus must be. Why? Because you don't have a crystal ball. Nobody has a crystal ball. People come to me with a plan for their company for 2025 or 2030. And I look at their plan and I say, a very interesting plan. I can tell you one thing about it. It's wrong. It's wrong because you can't plan for 2025 today with the knowledge of 2017. Some company founded in 2023 is going to eat your lunch. You must plan for 2025 with the knowledge of 2023. How do you do that? The way you do that is you make yourself a software company. Because Airbnb, if they need to change their business, they don't have to sell 1,000 hotels. They have to rewrite their app. And you can do that on short notice. And you can deploy it for free. And that gives them the flexibility to survive when a company like Hilton Hotels does not have that flexibility. Here is a great example of this. At Singularity University, our landlords are NASA. And they are not very good landlords, but they're good rocket scientists. And they sent this space probe out to Pluto. And they launched the space probe a long time ago in order to get to Pluto. So long ago, by the time it got to Pluto, Pluto was not even a planet anymore. Right? So how did that work? Well, this is a software device. And when it got to Pluto, it was running new software written just months before that could do new types of image processing, new types of data compression. And so it could be a device of today, even though it was launched a decade and a half ago. And as a software device, it was able to adapt, because you cannot get a hardware upgrade when you're out there at Pluto. Another great example, which we'll talk about a bit, is Uber. So Uber also provides transportation services, does not own any cars. Right? Now I know here in Seoul you only have the Uber Black, but in much of the world, Uber is actually driven by ordinary people who drive in their own cars. And they have become one of the world's most valuable private companies by not owning anything, just owning an app. Now, this is not trivial. They have problems. People have difficulty. This is a protest by the taxis in London. This is the reaction that happens. And as we said, in Seoul here, you don't allow this to go on. Some cities do and some cities don't. It's a bumpy road, but it's a road that will not be stopped. I want to go for a little bit for you on the other question of how the internet, not just the computer, drove into an exponential revolution. Having been on it since the 1970s, I've identified what I think are the essential ingredients that you want to see when you have an exponential revolution, and I want to share those with you. The first is the presence of early adopters. So early adopters are basically stupid people with too much money. Okay? They'll go out and they'll buy they'll be lining up to buy the version 10 of something, even though version 8 just came out. Now they're not actually stupid. They want to be on the cutting edge, and they provide innovation fuel for new products to get a foothold and get going. You also want to have an environment of open and hackable platforms. This is a little computer whose hardware is open source, not just its software. And the internet was built by a team of cooperating people all around the world who just contributed what they wanted to do for free. And it's remarkable that that and the Linux operating system and all these tools you've heard about did so competing with companies like Microsoft spending billions of dollars to try and win the market for servers and tools. They did this because of a rule that Bill Joy once said, that no matter what company you are, whether you are Google, whether you are Samsung, most of the smart people work for someone else. No company can get around this rule. Only by taking the wisdom of the entire world were the open platforms able to defeat big companies like Microsoft, because they might be able to say that most of the smart people actually were in their community because it came from everyone. Another important technique was the pricing model that the internet used. The internet was very different from the networks that came before it. When you pay for the internet in many places in the world, the way it works is you pay a flat fee for your line to the center of the network, and I pay a flat fee for my line, and then we can talk to each other without accounting for the individual differences, the individual packets. This gives people the illusion that it's free even though we're paying, and as a result, people can experiment. They can do things without figuring out the financial justification on day one. Companies like Google and Facebook can be born literally in college dorm rooms because they don't have to figure out their financial justification in order to get going. They don't have to raise a lot of money to get going because everyone is sharing the cost of the internet. This was a remarkable garden for what came after it. The other concept I want to briefly give you is an idea that we call the stupid network principle. Now, the former phone networks were selling at the time in the 80s something called the intelligent network. And it meant that if you had a phone, you could call the phone company and say, I would like to order voicemail and call waiting. And you got those new features from their fancy new switches on the phone you already had on your desk. And I see some young people in the room, so I'll explain. People used to have phones on their desks with wires coming out of them. You can still find them some places. But the intelligence was in the network then, and the internet turned it upside down and said, put the intelligence in the devices, in the phones, in the laptops, in the web servers, where anyone can innovate, anyone can do and change things. And this, again, provided this fertile ground. These are the ingredients you want to see if you want a change as big as the world has seen. This book by my colleague Salim Ismail, by the way, governs what big companies can learn about how to do that. Now, I'm not going to explain what's in the book, but I'm going to let you make note of it, so in case you're interested in seeing some of these principles. I'll close this section, though, by talking about the concept of the moonshot. This is the moon. It's not the side that everybody sees all the time. But nonetheless, my friend Astro Teller, who runs the X Lab at Google, did an interesting experiment where he went out to many companies and he asked them, if I could give you a choice, he asked the engineers, if I could give you a choice between two projects, one, will guarantee you $50 million, and the other has a 20 million shot of making your division $1 billion. Which should you do? And the engineer said, I want to do the $1 billion project. They can do the math. It looks like the right bet. He went to the managers and said, what would you want your team to do? And he said, I want them to do the $1 billion project. That's going to really change the world. Then he went back to the teams and he said, which one do you think your manager wants you to do? Which one is going to help your career at this company? And they all said, oh, the sure thing, the small sure thing. This is why nobody does moonshots, because everybody knows that the small sure thing is how you get promoted inside the company. And failing 3 times at the big, audacious $1 billion project gets you shown the door. If you want moonshots from your company, from your country, you have to find a way around this to convince people to actually make this swing for the fences, to use an American baseball metaphor. So this is the first section. Now, I want to go and now tell you something about a particular technology that I've been working on, many people have been working on, that's going to change things in the very near future. Let me just quickly switch my presentation inside here. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And that is the marriage of computers and cars. A remarkable marriage which is going to change our cities, where we live, how we live, and so many other things. Now, I'm going to cover for you many pillars of change, although we only have so much time today. So the first one I'll focus on is the ability to save lives. It turns out that we human beings are not very good drivers. Right? So every year, around the world, we kill 1.2 million people. It is like one of the world's great diseases, and we have become blind to it. In the United States, they had 37,000 people die last year, and their safety agency put a cost of $870 billion on those accidents, more than the cost of the gasoline in a big SUV. Now, I also calculate that Americans every year spend 50 billion hours doing this. 50 billion hours. The entire productive labor output of the United States is 240 billion hours. Now, there's some good news on this side of the world. Here, about 5,800 dead, but that's actually about the same number of deaths per 100,000 kilometers as the United, deaths per 100,000 people as the United States, but 2.5 times as bad as the United States per kilometer driven. So that's not good news, and there's important stuff to be done, but it's okay, because your neighbors are worse. There, the official government number is 62,000 fatalities, but for some reason, when a university studied it, they found the real number was 275,000. I don't know how the real number and the official number could be different. Maybe this is something about China that you know that I don't know. But the death toll is staggering. Now, 40% of those deaths involve alcohol, and we can fix that because robots very rarely drink. Maybe this Mexican robot is a rare exception. But you should also know that 25% of the energy budget of big countries like the United States and 25% of the greenhouse gases comes from cars, and the whole human race, I calculated, drives 1.7 light years every year. How many of you use light years in your work? Is this a common unit for human activity in your work? It's staggering to think that a light year can be a real unit of driving. So what's really going on? Everybody's getting in the game. So many companies, I don't have time to cover them all, but I will talk about this one, Tesla, because 2 years ago, Tesla owners woke up to find their car had some very limited autopilot ability, just came to them in the morning when they got the software update on their car. Somebody trusted it a bit too much, and this was the result. But what was surprising about this accident which killed a man who was trusting the autopilot too much back last year, is that the stock of Tesla company went up for 2 months after this happened. So many people felt that the first time there was an accident with a fatality that it would be over and everyone would have to step back. And this hasn't happened at all. So even though I'm the optimist, I'm becoming more optimistic about how quickly this will happen. This is a prototype car from Mercedes-Daimler. Here you see the seats facing each other, not like a regular car, a steering wheel hidden. Even car companies are starting to think differently about what they make and sell. Here's BMW, the ultimate driving machine, they say in the United States, with a bookshelf in the back of the car. of a concept car. This is the Ford car, and Ford has said they will not sell this car to anyone. They will only make it used in taxi fleets. This is Ford, a company that has sold cars for 100 years, saying, here's a car we are not going to sell. This German company may have a problem saying, trust your life to our software, why would we lie to you? But nonetheless, because they have been forced to rethink their company because of their scandal, we may actually see better things come from them. There are many suppliers of car companies, all who are building these technologies, and there are also, of course, Koreans. This is a Kia Soul, for example, which they have been testing and deploying now for over a year. And this is a Hyundai Ioniq, and they have several other cars there. Now, Hyundai has also done a partnership with Ford and Toyota, and many other Korean companies are also trying to get into this game. In fact, I was here in Seoul about a year and a half ago to help Naver get their project started. So just as Google in the United States is doing a car, it seems that search engines like to do it, and the folks at Naver are working hard on their project. This last week, November 8th, a special fake town was opened here in Korea called K-City, and this is a test track where cars can run around and get their initial testing done before they go out on the road, because you don't want to put people at risk. These companies, LG has gotten together with Qualcomm. Samsung is also building a car again. Samsung, as you may know, some of you know, used to make cars some time ago. They're actually getting back in that space. Here is an autonomous bus at KT is building. Here's a little Uber-type service that they made at SNU. And just coming up in a couple of months at the Winter Olympics, there will be an autonomous shuttle service in some Genesis G80s running back and forth between Seoul and the Olympics. And if you know the right people, maybe you can find a way to get a ride in there when you want to go out to the Olympics. Hyundai is also putting in, they have said, up to $70 billion of money into developing these projects. So lots going on here. But not just car companies are getting in the game. I mentioned LG and Samsung, but also this company, NVIDIA, which makes the graphics chips, which go in so many of our computers. They have built a whole self-driving test suite because they believe that the computer will be an important part of it. I'm not sure they're right, but they're putting a lot of emphasis on this. This is a French vehicle which has been for sale for 4 to 5 years now. So this is not a science fiction project for the future. This is something that you've been able to buy if you were running a shuttle on your campus, and these are out there in several places, and sometimes on city streets now, running shuttle service. As I mentioned, search engines seem to get into this game, so the Chinese are playing hard as well. Baidu has been testing cars in China and in Silicon Valley. Several other Chinese companies have been doing so. And in addition, Baidu just announced a 10 trillion won, or about a $1.5 trillion US dollar fund for funding startups and releasing their software open source. That lesson of the internet I told you about. Several companies are trying to also make long-haul trucking automated. This is a company that Uber bought, and Mercedes is also doing this. And there are many, many startups, too many even to put on a slide, but I will point out that 4 of the startups on this sheet have already received what they call a unicorn valuation. Do you use this term here in Korea, unicorn? Companies that have become worth close to $1 billion. Tiny startups in a very short amount of time. This is a video I made actually while I was driving of Apple's test car. So Apple is very secret about this project. They have to drive on the road so we can see it, but otherwise they don't tell anyone what they're doing, but they are doing something. I have learned one top secret thing about the Apple car. It will only work if you buy the new iPhone. So that may not be a joke. But the leader, by far, is the team. I worked on the Google car team for a few years. They have been driving now for 5.6 million kilometers on real roads, okay? So that's close to 10 human lifetimes of driving, way ahead of everybody else, at least so far. This is their first generation prototype, but I want you to see the third generation prototype, actually.
There it is. Oh, isn't that cute? Okay, Annie, here we go. Yeah. All right, Connie, let's go. There's no steering wheel in the way.
So if I had a self-driving car, I could spend more time hanging out with my kids or helping them with their homework, even just tending to them, finding out how their day was and not having to wait till you get home and have dinner and all that. So it'll be good.
Human feeling of it is very well engineered, and it is very smooth. There's nothing.
So he was about to say there's nothing that, sorry, I've gone backwards a bit, nothing that makes you feel threatened. Well, that car, which looks kind of cute and silly to people, is a threat to the automobile industry. Another company, which I mentioned earlier, Uber, is also developing and giving rides in these vehicles. So Uber is already the world's #1 brand in rides. And that's very important because while the car companies make cars, the real product is rides, and that's what's going to make the difference. So they have been happy to say to all the people who drive for them, no, we don't really think we're going to use you 10 years from now, and they get away with saying that. Not just them, this is General Motors put $500 million into the Lyft company, which is Uber's competitor, and spent $700 million to buy a tiny startup called Cruise. That's because General Motors decided that even though they were the world's 3rd largest car company, they were already too late, and they had to spend billions in order to stay in the game, acquiring companies. This may have worked for them. We'll see if it worked for them. But by the way, the Lyft part didn't work because just a month ago, Lyft took $1 billion investment from Alphabet, the parent company of Google, and they're going to partner together because Alphabet and Uber, which used to be friends, are not friends anymore. So, the numbers I've told you are huge. Trillions of dollars, right? Billions of tons of carbon dioxide, when we look at that, and millions of lives, all up for change by software. Now, one of the things that made this happen was the sensor you saw on top of that car. This is the old version. This is called a LiDAR. A LiDAR is a light radar. It sees the world in true 3D, not the fake 3D you have from 2 eyes. Here you can sort of see the low-resolution view of the world it has, but the clouds of dots you can see are cars and trees and rocks and lines on the road. It sees this with the full reliability in all directions, not with human vision, but superhuman vision, and as such is able to be safe enough to put on the road. I'm going to tell you how safe by saying that a week and a half ago, Google, or now called Waymo, announced that they would put their cars on the road with no human being behind the wheel able to take over if there's a problem. And they are offering service in Phoenix, Arizona in the United States. This was big news, just happened about a week ago. If you think this is far away, there's already pilot projects where they're confident enough to convince their board of directors and their lawyers that it's safe enough to put these cars out without a driver behind the wheel for the just-in-case scenarios. I also want you to look inside that little Google car we saw, and I want to ask you about the dashboard. So no steering wheel, no pedals, you saw that. But no dashboard either. There's no music system, right? There's no climate controls, because Google knows that you already have your music with you in your pocket. Probably on a Korean phone, by the way, but with the software written by Google, or maybe by Apple. So you don't need that in the car. This car is actually simpler. It's a different sort of space. Don't think of it the way you think of a car, because Google doesn't. My other favorite feature on that car, by the way, are the wing mirrors, side view mirrors, and that's because the law requires that all cars have to have wing mirrors. So we still comply with the rules. So step into this future, a world where you pick up your phone and you say you need a ride, and something rolls up to you within a minute and takes you where you want to go without taking time out of your day. It is first looks like a regular car, but later looks like something different. Maybe it has a couch for you to talk with your friends or coworkers, maybe a screen for working on, and it comes to you and picks you up. And a car that can do that does 4 key things for us. Oops, I went a little too fast. 4 key things. So it drives you around and keeps you safe, but this is also a car that can deliver itself to you. Cars become a deliverable thing, a cloud of service, which can come to you anywhere you are and take you somewhere. These vehicles also refuel or recharge themselves, and they also can store or park themselves. Now, those last 3 have big consequences for our cities as well as how they move us around. Remember what I said about Uber? Selling rides, not cars. If the economics of the auto industry change so that a lot of it becomes about rides rather than cars, all the rules change in a $7 trillion global ground transportation industry. And energy changes as well, because robots don't care about how convenient it is to recharge, which means that all the disadvantages of electricity in cars today go away. You don't ask your taxi driver, is there enough fuel in the tank when you get into the taxi, do you? Well, neither will you ask your electric robot taxi, because it's worried about recharging. All of those disadvantages go away, and so suddenly all the economics of energy and oil go away. That's a huge thing to happen because of some software. This is Moore's Law, which I told you about, and you'll hear about again more today, coming to the industrial world, to transportation. Now, even the computer industry I showed you doesn't have those intuitions, those exponential intuitions, in spite of 50 years' practice. The industrial world definitely doesn't have those intuitions. And yet it will have to learn, because the pace of change of the digital world is now going to come to the transportation world and the industrial world. Now, we see two different kinds of companies trying to make this happen. The car companies do what car companies would do, which is take cars, add computers to them to improve them and make them drive themselves. But the non-car companies, like Naver and Google, they think of it as, let's take a computer and put wheels on it and see what happens. Same goal, but different approaches and different speeds and paces of innovation. And that means I think we're going to see different winners and losers in the future. On the losing side are the old world, the people who sell cars, the people who make internal combustion cars, the people who sell insurance, the car dealers. And on the winning side, the people who make rides, who sell rides rather than cars, the people who make the components for these new styles of cars, single-person cars, electric cars, these services. This is what will be on the winning side. Now, I've told you about cars taking people around, but I want to tell you about something else in the few remaining minutes, which is that throughout the world, there is one product which is so important and valuable that no matter where you are and no matter when it is, you can get it in 30 minutes. Well, what if you have delivery vehicles that can bring you anything in 30 minutes, not just a pizza? Right? Here it's bibimbap or something, I guess, so you get maybe, but in the US it's definitely pizza. So this is a project I'm working on with a group of people in Estonia, and we have built delivery robots the size of small coolers that run on the sidewalk. And these will come to you very safely and at very low cost. It'll be less than 1,000 won to make a delivery. Well, what happens when you can deliver anything in quick time for less than 1,000 won? What does that mean for all the retailers? What does that mean for even owning things if you can get anything on short notice? Because maybe you don't even need to keep it in your apartment because it will come to you when you want. It may be that goods can move as easily as data. I've come up with a name for this. I think we should call it the Internet of Things. What do you think? You think that name will catch on? Okay. Maybe someone else has got that name. But nonetheless, there's a lot of change coming. This is a list of a dozen different industries that I see as being turned upside down when transportation works this way. So here you can see, obviously, the automotive industry and the energy industry, what I've spoken about. But think about real estate. The value of real estate is defined by location. That's the joke they always make. It's all about location. The meaning of location is going to change. The meaning of distance is going to change, as it did in the 20th century because of the car, and our cities changed because of that. In the 19th century, because of the train, our cities changed. The 21st century will see a change like that. Insurance, parking, these cars don't park. They stand or they go pick someone else up. We're not going to need all the parking lots. We're suddenly going to have a bonanza of land inside our cities. Retailing, I touched on. Doctors will not be patching you up after a car crash, which is great news for them. Even airports will change. They are the interface from ground transportation. So this list goes on and on. So I mentioned earlier on today the need for moonshots. And so this is such a thing, a moonshot. This is John F. Kennedy. I'm sure you recognize him, the American president who gave the speeches that spawned the original moonshot, the Apollo program. And so I'm going to make a big mistake now and butcher his words for you and say this. This nation should set itself the goal before this decade is out of a computer driving a man to lunch at noon and returning him safely to work. Okay, so this is the mistake of having a Canadian do an impression of an American president to a group of Koreans. But Kennedy said in these speeches something else that I like a great deal. He said, some projects are worth doing not just because they're easy, but because they're hard. This is such a project. It's hard. It was science fiction not too many years ago today. But smart people, brilliant people are working on it, they're solving it, and they are going to change the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Brad Templeton. 교수님 감사합니다.